Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm really excited to be here. I'm so enthused by all the speakers that I've heard so far, and I'm so privileged to be in such esteemed company. The panel was absolutely fantastic, and actually covered loads of things that I'm going to say. So maybe I'll elide over those parts, but no, absolutely brilliant to be here, and I hope you all have a really wonderful evening. I am, for those of you who haven't met me before, my name's Emma Fay, and as you can see, I'm the Director of Education at Just Like Us. I use the pronouns she, her, or they, them, so either is fine. I started out my career as an English teacher, and I taught for several years in some really, really wonderful schools in and around East London. But a few years ago, I left to join the charity sector, and I've been with Just Like Us for about 2.5 years. At Just Like Us, we describe ourselves as the charity, the LGBT plus young people's charity. Fundamentally, we want all young people to know that being LGBT plus is something to be celebrated. And we work with young people, with primary and secondary educators, like lots of people here. And our programs are about making education more inclusive to improve the lives of LGBT plus young people. And LGBT plus staff in schools as well, actually, and essentially to amplify the voices of LGBT plus children, young people, and young adults. Which brings me on to what I'm here to talk about today. So there's been existing research out there from several different sources about young LGBT plus people's experiences in education, as well as their well-being. But there has been quite a few changes over the past few years, as I'm sure we all know. So firstly, and obviously, we are now still, sadly, and we were when we did this research, in the middle of a pandemic. So when we surveyed young people, they had been through 2 lockdowns and they were going into a third. At Just Like Us, we had a real sense that there were disproportionately negative effects on LGBT plus people, and there was some initial research coming out of the University of Sussex that was indicating that this was the case for adults, but there was no evidence for young people. We were worried for the young people who were perhaps forced into environments where suddenly they might not be able to be themselves, perhaps with reduced access to those that they have been closest to, or reduced access to support services. In addition to that, we've also seen education make some big changes over the past few years. And as someone who's been in education for nearly a decade, it's really felt as though attitudes have shifted when it comes to LGBT inclusive education and schools' understanding of and their openness to working more proactively about on diversity and inclusion more generally. So not everywhere, not everywhere, of course, but things do feel different. We also wanted to say, have some more in-depth information around young people's friendships, their habits and their attitudes, and we felt like maybe there was cause for optimism here. So not to kind of preempt the results of the research, but we wanted to ask them about things like who they knew was LGBT plus and what they would offer to a friend coming out, both in their sexual orientation or gender identity. And we wanted to ask what mattered to them as well. So the things that they felt made the most difference to them. So quite often you see young people question in relation to like interventions that we expect to see or things that we feel should be in place. But we wanted to give them the opportunity to tell us what made the most difference to them when it comes to their own experiences. So as a practitioner in LGBT plus education, the prospect of hearing from so many young people directly about what matters to them was hugely exciting. So we surveyed them. Between December 2020 and January 2021, we ran a student survey exploring their well-being and experiences of young people, including young LGBT plus people aged 11 to 18. We had almost 3,000 young people from 375 schools and colleges across the UK. And I'm going to share a number of the results with you tonight. In case you're wondering who I'm including in the term LGBT plus, For the purposes of the research, the term encompasses students who have defined their sexual orientation as gay, bisexual, queer, asexual, pansexual, or questioning, or those who identify as transgender, or those who describe themselves as intersex. The remaining non-LGBT plus respondents were used as a control group to compare the LGBT and non-LGBT plus respondents. So I'm going to bring some good news with this, but unfortunately a lot of what we found out still indicates that young people, young LGBT plus people, sorry, face disproportionate levels of hardship. And I will also give a content notice at this point, because I'm going to mention homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, and issues relating to mental ill health, such as self-harm and suicide. All of the information that I'm going to talk about tonight is going to be included in the report Growing Up LGBT+, which is going to be released on Tuesday morning. Some of the information that I'm going to share has not been officially released yet, so please don't share it more widely than this conference. You'll see on the screen there'll be a marker to say which information has and hasn't yet been officially released. Okay, so we'll start with well-being, and it's not a new story to say that there is a mental health crisis when it comes to all young people today, but we have seen how this is exacerbated if they also identify as LGBT+. So we asked all the young people to characterise their well-being over the last 12 months, which at that time would have included the period of time shortly before the first lockdown. And across the board, LGBT+ students who so at the moment on the screen you can see a chart being represented. Oh, I've gone went ahead too far there. You can see a chart being represented with the data relating to the question, in the last 12 months, how often have you experienced the following? We asked young people how often they had experienced this, and this information is about how often they felt this daily or weekly. Across the board, LGBT+ young people who are represented on the screen in the red were less likely than the non-LGBT+ peers to experience feeling close to other people, thinking clearly, feeling relaxed, dealing with problems well, feeling good about themselves, feeling useful, or feeling optimistic about the future. And in fact, to summarise everything that you see on the screen, there were roughly half as likely as non-LGBT+ students to experience all but one of these positive feelings on a daily basis. I think on the chart you can see weekly kind of bringing those closer to each other, but when you look at this specifically on a daily basis, it's much closer to half as likely for young LGBT+ young people.
Sorry, Emma, could you read maybe a couple of the stats and describe for the visually impaired people in the room, please? Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, so for instance, so the list that all of the things that I listed represent the one of the axes on the chart. And so, for example, for one of them, for instance, when we asked them if they felt good about themselves on a daily or weekly basis, 48% of LGBT+ young people said that they had experienced this in the last 12 months, whereas 69% of non-LGBT+ young people said that they had experienced that in the last 12 months on a daily or weekly basis. Another example is feeling useful. So for young LGBT+ people, again, 48% said that they had experienced that feeling in the last 12 months on a daily or weekly basis. And 71% of non-LGBT+ young people said responded the same way to that aspect of the question. In addition to well-being, they also described They also reported being twice as likely to have experienced or to be experiencing other very serious mental health challenges. So to describe what's on the screen, these included anxiety disorders, depression, panic attacks, self-harm, eating disorders. Some said none of the above, some preferred not to say. And then alcohol and drug dependence was an option. And then there was an option to describe any other condition. And again, the statistics here were very stark for young LGBT plus people. So for example, 51% of the LGBT plus young people asked described that they had experienced an anxiety disorder, whereas only 26%, so again, around half of non-LGBT plus young people said that they had experienced an anxiety disorder. I can see a comment, oh, okay, great. I can see a comment saying the screen hadn't moved on, but it seems like it has now, which is great. With depression, again, it was 47% of LGBT plus young people had experienced this, 20% of non-LGBT plus young people. Panic attacks, 37% of LGBT plus young people and 15% of non-LGBT plus young people. Self-harm, 3 times as many LGBT plus young people, 31% said that they had experienced that, whereas it's 9% of non-LGBT plus young people. And with eating disorders, 20% of LGBT plus young people, 7% of non-LGBT plus young people, and alcohol drug dependence, again, 3 times as many, so 6% of LGBT plus young people said that they had experienced that, against 2% of non-LGBT plus young people. We saw a similar consistency when we asked young people how the pandemic had changed things for them. So LGBT plus young people reported higher instances of worrying about their mental health on a daily basis during lockdown, feeling lonely and feeling separated from the people that they are closest to on a daily basis. So again, the LGBT plus young people are represented in the red, non-LGBT plus in the grey, and I'm just going to highlight a couple of these particularly notable results. So 79% of LGBT plus young people said that on a daily or weekly basis they had been worrying about their mental health, so an overwhelming majority of them, whereas 49% of non-LGBT plus young people had said that. I mean, still a huge percentage, still half of the young people we surveyed. In addition to that, 78% of young LGBT plus people said that they had felt lonely or separated from the people that they were closest to, against 55% of non-LGBT plus young people. So just to highlight a couple of the key statistics featured there. I've used the term LGBT plus a lot already in this talk, and I do so many times a day, kind of lose count as to how many times I use it in a day, or sometimes even an hour. But we've already heard the word intersectionality so many times this evening, and I don't think it's going to surprise anyone to hear that when we break down the responses even further, not just by LGBT plus identity, but by other factors relating to these young people, we started to see bigger differences emerge. And it becomes clear that there are many who are even further away from feeling well, safe and accepted. A really disheartening constant of our research was the vastly different and worse outcomes for Black LGBT plus young people. So 61% said that they worried about their mental health on a daily basis, and this was the highest of all the groups that we surveyed. We discovered that young lesbians have also reported notably adverse effects during the pandemic. So 87% said they had felt lonely and separated from the people they were closest to during lockdown. Second only to young lesbians, bisexual and pansexual people are experiencing worsening mental health pressure as well. So 74% of bisexual, 59% of pansexual young people felt that their mental health has got worse since the pandemic. Transgender young people also reported challenges relating to their mental health, and they were also the most likely to say that their health had got worse during lockdown, so 71% said that, and also that they were not feeling optimistic about the future. And given the public discussion around trans lives at the moment, it's hardly surprising that young trans people have felt increasingly vulnerable. Disabled LGBT plus young people were less positive than their peers without disabilities on all counts, particularly when we asked them around, again, their mental health and about feeling good about themselves. So 65% of disabled young people, LGBT plus disabled young people, worry daily for their mental health. And LGBT plus students who are eligible for free school meals reported feeling more lonely and separated from the people that they're closest to on a daily basis since the pandemic began. So that's 62%. And that was against around 30% of pupils who are not LGBT but still eligible for free school meals, and 30% for pupils who are not LGBT and not eligible for free school meals. I'm so sorry, I'm giving you lots and lots of statistics. I've tried to kind of narrow it down to the key ones. There's so much more in the report, but I do apologise for kind of statistic bombing everybody. So this just for us, it just again emphasised the point that we've had so many times tonight, is that we can't think of LGBT plus young people as a unified group having similar experiences. We have to take an intersectional approach to help us understand all young people and how we can best support and champion them all. Okay, so I've given you quite a lot of depressing news, unfortunately. So I'm going to turn towards some better news and also the other constructive insights that we got from young people. So on Transgender Day of Visibility, this March 31st, Just Like Us, we were really excited to be able to share some good news. And whilst some attitudinal surveys had indicated that young people have broadly accepting attitudes towards transgender people, when we asked them specifically about it, almost all young people said that they would support a friend if they came out as transgender. So obviously we know that intent doesn't always translate to effective support, and obviously we have to be really careful about what we're saying here, but the indicators are really promising. On the screen you can see a graph which represents the question, what would your reaction be if a close friend came out as transgender? And I'm highlighting specifically the response where young people said that they would be very supportive, and 93% of LGBT plus young people said that they would be very supportive, and 67% of non-LGBT plus young people said that they would be very supportive. Young people were less sure when we asked them about whether they felt a transgender young person would be supported by their school or college. Only a minority expected staff to be unsupportive, but a lot were uncertain. And obviously no young transgender person in school should ever be left in doubt whether they will or won't be supported. So there's obviously some work to be done here to assure to assure other students that transgender young people will get the support that they need. And our last area of inquiry was around inclusive education initiatives. So we asked about which initiatives and intervention young people are aware of at their school or college, what makes the biggest difference to them, and crucially, what more they would like to see. We did also survey staff. There was just so much that we asked them. The staff also feature in the report. I'm not talking about their responses tonight, but everything is in the report. So please do go and check it out and have a look, because we also asked teachers and other school staff what they were experiencing and what they thought. So unfortunately, the majority of students had little to zero positive messaging about being LGBT plus in the last year. So 1 in 5 are yet to receive any positive messaging at all, and a third say that there are no visual signs of support in their school. So the question, the data being represented on the screen is in response to the question, how often, there's a bit of a typo, how often are positive messages promoted about being LGBT plus? And around 19% of LGBT plus people said never, and 33% said once or twice a year, although 27% did say monthly and 16% did say weekly, and an amazing 5% said that they're being promoted daily. So that's the kind of good end of the scale, that there are still, you know, 1 in 5 are also experiencing weekly and daily positive messaging. And when we asked them what made the most difference to their lives, there were 3 things that stood out in their responses. The data I'm describing is in response to the question, as an LGBT+ person, what makes the most positive difference to your daily life at school? So obviously these are people's feelings on the things which, young people's feelings on what makes life better for them. Over half of them, so 52%, to just the responses of LGBT+ students now, said that seeing other LGBT+ students and staff makes the most positive difference. They also wanted to know that their school regards homophobic, transphobic and biphobic bullying as unacceptable. So 49% said that made the most difference to them. They could multi-select on this question, so they could select different options at the same time. And almost as many, so about 40%, also identified knowing that this bullying and discrimination would be followed up on. So this really underlines the importance of representation and messaging, which I think so many people have already spoken about tonight. The other things that they mentioned were knowing that supportive members of staff that are there that they can turn to about LGBT+ issues, seeing LGBT+ people and content included in lessons, that was 33%, having an LGBT+ and ally student group, 24%, said that made the most positive difference, and another 24% said knowing that there are student support representatives I can turn to. I want to end on some calls to action. So the report, as it says there, makes recommendations for school leaders, all school staff and parents and carers. The recommendations are suitable for primary and for secondary. So I think firstly, let's hear young people when they tell us what makes a difference to them. You know, visibility isn't always easy. Not every school community is a place where pupils and staff feel able to be open about who they are. And obviously no one should be made to come out if they're not ready, they're not safe, or they don't want to. But if that's the case, then it's still obviously possible to work a relatable LGBT+ people into other areas of school life, displays, lessons, assembly, speakers, all of those kind of things. Just Like Us has freely available resources to support with each of those things. Obviously tackling homophobia, biphobia and transphobia is so central. Making sure that those policies and procedures are all in place, and that they cover off and online, that people know about them, and that it's demonstrable that instances of discrimination, bullying and abuse are taken seriously. Having, you know, as a school community, taking steps to understand and show that understanding that within the school community experiences will vary significantly, and that there are those whose challenges are like markedly different to others who are also LGBT+. So I've heard of many schools taking a kind of an effective, wider approach to diversity inclusion with a really meaningful approach to each aspect of those things that avoids being tokenistic. We also highlighted taking a lead from young people, so as a whole body of pupils and also as individuals, so via things such as pride groups, which are an amazing source of student voice, but giving all young people the chance to feedback and to be involved in the initiatives that make their school a more inclusive place, giving them the agency, allowing them to describe who they are. I feel like the audience that I'm speaking to tonight is probably not the audience that will really need to hear these messages, but obviously hopefully these are all things that is useful for you to take away and to take to the people that certainly will need to hear them. And then obviously signposting support and making sure that there's a good awareness of the things that are available for those young people, especially things that they can access in their local area. And last, just making sure that the message about being LGBT+ is clear, so that fundamentally it just boils down to some people are LGBT+, and that is both normal or usual, however you'd like to describe it, and more than that, it's something to be celebrated. And as I've said, Just Like Us is here to support you. We also have free resources. We have over 100 free resources available on our School Diversity Week toolkit. So you can access it just by going to justlikeus.org, and it should be right there on the first page. But also, if you have any questions at all, obviously I can answer questions tonight, but I will, I'm very, very accessible to anybody who wants to do anything relating to LGBT plus education. So you can always give me a shout. We also have a Facebook group for educators, which I think I have actually linked to it. I will post.
I'll just put the link to your organisation in the chat, Emma, and it will also be sent to all the delegates. All the links that are being shared will be sent to everyone who came and didn't. We've got a very large number of people registered, but not all of them can make it. I think you need a glass of water, because that was a lot of talking. But Sue was saying it's absolutely, I mean, I believe data is power. So that's really, really crucial and really interesting piece of work. I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So two people want to know where this report will be made available and where they can access it. Would it be on your website?
It will, yes. Yeah, very important information. I did not include it. It will be on our website. It will be on all of our social media channels as well.
So I would highly recommend that you follow justlikeus.org. So Sabrina in Swansea, USA, there is a Swansea in the United States. How did you identify students for research? That's a really, really good question.
So the research was done through an independent research agency called Sybil, and there's a whole section in the report on methodology and how we reached out to the young people, but essentially it was through the Sybil network. We didn't want to survey the schools that were working with us, because we thought that because they're more likely to be doing more LGBT plus inclusion, that would give us, you know, a less representative view. So we worked with Sybil to find, to work with their network of schools.
Thank you. A question from EJ Francis Harris-Harmer. Did the students find the LGBT plus inclusion within school day-to-day teaching and learning was reduced during lockdown? That's a really good question.
It's a really good question, and I really wish we'd asked it, because we didn't ask that particular question in the report. We asked how their well-being had been affected during lockdown, but not specifically how education interventions had been affected. I think anecdotally, as somebody who's been working with schools, you know, before, during and after lockdown, I would say that inevitably it does seem to have reduced, simply because of the difficulties with teaching, with doing remote learning. I mean, it's been so hard for school staff to adapt, and it's also been really difficult for young people to do that much remote learning. So I think there has been generally a reduction in terms of curriculum content. Not that should involve a reduction in LGBT plus inclusive teaching, but I think it has unfortunately inevitably meant that. It's also meant that things like, so we support schools to run LGBT plus and allies groups, we call our pride groups. They generally run with across different year groups. So we'll have like multi-year groups coming together, perhaps in lunchtime. And of course, they haven't had lunchtime at the same time. They have all been in bubbles and they're not allowed to interact with each other. So they've had, there've been issues there where those kind of interventions haven't been able to happen.
Thank you. I'm mindful of the time. So EJ Francis has offered to support a section on COVID-19 interviewing teachers, and Claire would like to know whether any of the participants came from faith-based schools.
Yes, yeah, they did. Oh my gosh, Claire, I'm so sorry. I wish I had the data to hand. We did have, within the data, we certainly had a representative number of Catholic and Church of England schools. But again, that is something which, if it's not in the methodology, again, if you can get in touch and I'll let you know how that broke down as well.
Thank you so very much. Just on the topic of impact during the pandemic, my curriculum background is in ESOL, and I've just written a paper for an academic journal called Language Issues, where we actually reviewed several, it was a smaller sample, but ESOL is smaller in terms of the sector. And we found that equality, diversity, and inclusion was put on the back burner because a lot of the ESOL learners suffered from digital exclusion and didn't have access. And a lot of the migrants, refugees, and people seeking asylum usually went to the libraries to be able to access it, but then when they closed, they couldn't access it. And their children, and sometimes there weren't enough devices for the kids to access. So digital exclusion has had an impact, and then as a domino and knock-on effect onto other things. I mean, what prompted me last year to start this is because I feared that with the lockdown, people wouldn't be so keen on LGBTQ plus inclusion in their curriculum, and they would focus on the main subject in inverted comma. But as we've seen, you can still focus on the main subject and embed it. So Emma, I want to thank you so very, very, very much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Do you want to read some of the comments while I'm bringing up some of the other panelists? So we've got Katie, Greg, and Lynn, which I'm just bringing up. Would you like to share some of the comments with us?
So just having a quick look at the comments, I can see that from Sue. Sue has said that it's often asked how things are in schools, crucial to help people understand that each school is different. Thank you so much, Sue, for your kind words. It means so much coming from you. But yeah, I completely agree. It's very difficult to generalize on these things because it is so variable across different schools. Thank you for all of, thank you Kate and Terry for your lovely comments. I'm scrolling, Lila.
Thank you so very much. We've got our next panel ready and it's 1929. Am I a stickler for time or am I a stickler for time? Emma, thank you so much. I'll probably see you on Monday at my G Work. If people don't know about my G Work, it is the biggest LGBTQ plus inclusion in the workplace. It's their second Work Pride conference. It's called Work Pride 2021. And they've got, I think, like 60 webinars and 350 people from all over the world. I'm just going to stick it in the chat. It's phenomenal what they have achieved, the Gobert brothers. But anyway, I'm digressing. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome. Love the hair, Greg, and really good to see you, Anna. So without further ado, I'm going to love you and leave you. Anna, you're in charge. So over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Lila, and greetings, everybody.
From Canada.
Let me take an important moment before we begin to recognize that I have the immense honor and privilege of speaking to all of you from Treaty 7 territory in Mcginnis, what is today known as Calgary. But within the spirit of reconciliation, reciprocity, and truth, we acknowledge, and I acknowledge, that I live, work, and play on the lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, the Yahe Nakota Nation, the Tsuut'ina Nation. We acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We acknowledge these lands remain home to a number of Indigenous nations and people. We acknowledge this land out of respect for the Indigenous nations who have cared for Turtle Island, what is also called North America, from before the arrival of settlers and colonizers. Today, recognizing Indigenous and non who live, work, and play on this land, and to honor and celebrate this territory. Finally, and most importantly, before we begin, we need to recognize the ongoing acts of genocide and crimes against humanity, which have been inflicted towards Indigenous peoples here within Canada and on traditional lands around the world, seeing all of us needing to play an active and ongoing role in truth and reconciliation. As Lila mentioned at the very beginning, my name is Anna Murphy. I am an advocate for gender and sexual diverse communities, LGBTQ2IA+. I'm an aspiring politician, having recently just completed a campaign, and I am a fiercely proud and passionate Calgarian and Albertan. Today, I have the privilege of helping to chair and guide the conversation with a group of truly remarkable panelists who, in their own ways, are driving meaningful and tangible change for transgender, two-spirit, gender diverse, and all youth under the rainbow. Delegates in attendance today will have the opportunity to hear from Katie Neves, she, her, who formed Cool to be Trans to inspire other trans people and also to educate others on trans issues. Greg Mcginnis, he, him, math teacher and PhD student at the IOE UCL, along with Lynn Reagan, she, her, a doctoral student at the OU and co-chair of the University of Kent LGBTQ+ staff network. If at any point those in attendance have questions or remarks, please invite you to use the chat function or the Q&A function, which you can find down at the bottom of the screen. And we will begin forming a queue so that all panelists can be able to engage in the conversation. But with that, I am going to open the conversation and pass the mic first to Katie Neves to kick us off.
Thanks very much, Anna, for the great introduction. If you hear any noises here, it's my cat. So he's down here. He likes to join me on all these things. So basically what I'd like to talk about more is sort of the sort of general sort of tips for being a trans ally. And I know the other two have got some tips of their own, so I don't want to sort of tread on their toes. So there's quite a few that I would like to give. But one thing that I'd like to say is the general need for trans inclusion within trans inclusion training for the staff and students at schools. I mean, Emma's presentation that she did just now was just phenomenal, and I would say it'd be shocking, but I'm not shocked by those stats. But yeah, very, very, very powerful. But obviously, teachers, without the training, they're going to come with their own bias, and so what and why shouldn't they? But that's where the training should come in and help them to sort that out. And previously, I used to think that the younger generation had just really got it, and they were really, really accepting and everything. But then I'd done quite a lot of speaking with Pride youth groups, and I was actually quite shocked when they sort of said, "Well, actually, yes, there is a huge problem with transphobic, biphobic, homophobic, lesbophobic bullying within secondary schools particularly." So I just really think that there is such a strong case for trans inclusion training and within the schools. And I think particularly with storytelling, I think storytelling is so important. If you can get people that come along just to tell their own stories who are actually living it, then people really take that on board and they respond really well to it. Another tip is just basically just to get across that something that so many people get confused about, and that's just basically the difference between sex, gender, and sexuality. So I'm just going to go through those just very, very quickly. So, sex, we're all born as just babies with various different bits between our legs, bits between our ears, bits inside us, bits on the ends of our arms and legs. But the only bits that count for the birth certificate are the bits between our legs. And certainly here in the UK, with the doctors or midwives, have just got this binary choice: boy or girl. That's all they have. And in other parts of the world, it's starting to change. But over here, that's all we've got: boy or girl, and that's it. And the thing is that sex itself isn't binary. There are a lot of intersex people. It's just under 2% of the population, something like that. So it's not to be sniffed at. So sex itself isn't binary. Gender is about how you feel in your head and your heart as a person. You just know who you are, and you don't need to look at your genitalia to know who you are. And and for about 99% of the population, the two coincide. Gender and sex coincide. Lucky them, I say. But for about 1% of the population, that doesn't. And again, Gender itself isn't binary. There's a whole spectrum, and it's not linear either. Many people are what's called agender, so they don't have a gender at all. But if you imagine it just for simplicity purposes as a linear thing, 100% male on one end, 100% female on the other end, we're all somewhere along on the spectrum somewhere. But most cisgender people, that's non-trans people, have never had a reason to look at whereabouts they are on that gender, because the gender's never caused them any issues. And for people that are in the middle, then they're non-binary. And then for gender fluid people, they're roughly in the middle, but sometimes they feel male and sometimes they feel female. And all of these things are perfectly normal, perfectly natural ways of being a human being. There's nothing wrong with human beings, but there's an awful lot wrong with the labeling system that we're all forced to currently adopt and have done for years. And then the very last point that I'd like to make is that just to encourage cisgender people just to stand up to transphobia whenever they hear it. You know, if trans people aren't in a position to defend themselves. And I'll give you an example. This happened to me about a year and a half ago. So just before we were all in lockdown and stuck on Zoom, you know, and I was at an event. Remember those things, events, where there's lots of people in the room. And I was told about a conversation between two men. And one of them said to the other one, pointed me out and said, "Oh, you see that woman over there? That used to be Martin Neves," because that's my old name. "That used to be Martin Neves. I don't get it myself." And was talking about me quite disparagingly. But thankfully, the man that he was talking to had the benefit of watching a lot of my videos, a lot of my vlogs where I'd vlog my journey. And so he was able to educate the other man in there. And I thought, well, that's brilliant. That is what a true ally does. It would have been so easy for him to have done the polite thing and said nothing and just moved on, but he didn't. He stood up for me, and I'll be forever grateful to him for that. So I think if there's the most important thing out of all those things is to stand up to transphobia. So back to you, Anna.
Well, thank you so much, Kate. And, you know, it absolutely, you know, there's a lot of truth and validity into the reality that, you know, gender and identity, first and foremost, it is deeply personal. And secondly, that it is fluid. And I think, you know, as we continue to go on this journey and educate, as the title of this conference says, we will start to get more people into that headspace and educated to the reality that it's not necessarily binary. It doesn't necessarily fit into a box. So thank you, Kate. I want to pass the mic off to Greg Mcginnis, who, you know, I didn't get the memo. I clearly should have, you know, done my hair in a vibrant color. I love it.
It's
Hello,
all right.
Greg.
I'll forgive you. Don't worry. All right, well, thank you for having me. As I said, my name is Greg Mcginnis. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a maths teacher currently working in North London, and I am completing a PhD at the Institute of Education, University College London, with my research generally interested philosophically in what education as an activity actually is and should aspire to be. Just a note for clarity, I will be using the term trans as an inclusive word for anybody who identifies as non-cisgendered, and that's just for sake of clarity through what I'm talking about. I've been teaching in secondary schools in a mixed comprehensive education for the past 8 years. And during that time, I've really noticed a rise in the use of transphobic language, particularly from parents and guardians. I've felt that any complaint received over trans inclusion initiatives fit quite well into the category of, you know, what we hear about in the media, gender critical. Some of the things that have been said to me personally have ranged from being told to read a beginner's guide to feminism on Amazon, with the parents sending me a link to the book, to being accused of influencing young students to all reject their gender. And that actually had a legal threat of action to the school. Behind most of these arguments, there have been a few groups named that seem to be influencing what's being put forward, including, when I look into one of them, advice on how to force a school to dissociate from Stonewall. And I actually had entered our school in as a school champion a couple of years ago. Because of this, I thought it would be most effective if I talked today about what I believe any inclusive initiative should actually stem from. I'm also not trans myself, so what I wanted to do with this talk was approach it from the perspective that I believe an ally should. To do this, I've set up things in terms of 3 questions that I think you should bear in mind if you want to create a more trans-inclusive pedagogy and school more generally. These move from the classroom to the hallway and finally to the school more generally. So distinct but connected at the same time. With that in mind, my first question to everybody here is, what does your teaching aim to achieve in the classroom? I think this is a really important first question that we should always be asking ourselves as educators, as it relates directly to not only the educational goals that you wish to achieve with students, but also the experiences that your classroom offers them in order to meet them. For trans students, they should be empowered to use their voice in the classroom, which was also what was discussed previously. Your role should be in creating an environment for them to do so rather than speaking for them. For some, I believe, this may actually be quite radical, as it looks at decentering where the power lies in the classroom, repositioning the teacher from the center of power. The second question I have then is, what kind of student are your school's policies encouraging? If you take a behavior policy, for instance, it exists to encourage some behaviors while deterring others. It's the whole point of positive and negative feedback, as it were. What I wonder with this kind of thing in a school is, what are such policies actually ultimately encouraging our students to be? What kind of citizens we want them to be when they enter the world? Related to this, I think quite obviously, is the idea of allyship, which I always reference to Stonewall's No Bystanders work when I talk about, because I think their campaign was excellent when they did it at the time. Going back to recognizing the voice of others, allyship should be about allowing for everybody to feel supported and empowered to use their voice rather than, again, speaking for them. To me, this is a simple idea, but one that I truly believe is missing currently in public discourse at the moment. I think that is seen especially with the UK media and trans inclusion. The last question I have then is, what is the educational ethos of your school? I posed this question last as I think while it focuses on the institution as a whole, it also trickles back down into what you are doing in the classroom, with one feeding into the other in either or both directions. When looking at developing more inclusive policies in your school then, I think that this is a fundamental aspect of any conversation that's had on a managerial level, considering whether inclusion and diversity are core tenets of what your school is aiming to achieve, tying every policy or classroom decision that is made then to it. As I said, while each of these questions are tackling a different aspect of education within a school, I hope that you can see that they are all linked together, moving interchangeably from the specific to the more general. This link, which I believe is imperative to any consideration around inclusion generally and trans inclusion specifically, is the nature of education within your school and what it aims to achieve. Thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions.
Well, thank you so much, Greg. And I look so forward to seeing the links to all of those wonderful questions dropped into the chat. I think those are really good. You know, if we think of the folks who are on the call today, going back into their communities, into their schools, into wherever they're going, being able to really sit around, you know, the boardroom table, the conference table, you know, wherever they're going, and asking those questions and getting people to, you know, getting people thinking and starting the conversation. But the other part is, you know, as you mentioned, you are an ally and have demonstrated the reality that ally is a verb. And so it's not just the trans, non-binary, two-spirit, gender diverse individuals who need to be doing this work. We also need folks like yourself and, you know, anyone else who is currently watching, the allies, recognizing that ally is a verb, it requires action. And today, some really, really great action has been taken. So thank you, Greg. We are going to continue into our conversation. I do see the questions are rolling in, and we absolutely are going to answer them, but I want to get to Lynn first to go to Lynn's opening remarks. Lynn, hello, how are you?
Hello, Anna. Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Very well, very well. Take us away.
Thank you. So yeah, my name's Lynn, and I'm in the final throes of completing a doctorate in education, where I'm looking at the experiences of trans students in higher education in the UK, which is an incredibly under-researched area. I'm bringing two perspectives to the talk today. One as an ally researcher trying to give trans students a voice, and the other as a mother of a trans son who had his own difficulties at university and who was given his permission for me to talk about this today. It was my son's journey that really inspired me, if that's the right word, to investigate the issues that trans students experience. Some of the problems that came up in my research were poor administration with regards to processes in place or not for students to change their name or pronouns, lack of gender neutral facilities, and a real lack of representation in the curriculum. My son had advised the university he was trans and of his name and pronouns in advance of starting university. And although he didn't change his name formally until after the first year, but he spent the whole of the first year appearing on class registers under his dead name and having to email lecturers and seminar leaders with his correct name and pronoun, and having to actually miss out on completing a piece of online work where the computer system would have shown his dead name to his classmates. There were just no processes in place for him to easily rectify this on the university systems. My research highlighted many of the same issues: poor or non-existent procedures for name and pronoun changes, and inadequate systems resulting in students being dead named. And given my son's experience with just one online task, I'm sure this only got worse when everything went online due to COVID. I also work at a university, and a trans student I support said that they cried when teams were set to show full names instead of just the initial and surname, because although they had a preferred name on the university system, which was used for most purposes, for some reason, when teams changed, it pulled all the names from the legal names on the university systems, overnight outing both trans students and staff who had not formally changed their names. With regards to gender neutral facilities, many of the students I interviewed for my research commented on the regular method of reclassifying disabled toilets for use by anyone, rather than creating gender neutral spaces. Both my son and some of my research participants expressed how they felt uncomfortable using the toilets that have been specifically put in place for disabled people, worried that someone who really needed to use those facilities could be left waiting because they were using them. My son also endured lacking and negative trans representation in the curriculum. He was studying English literature, and at one point he chose a module on gender and sexuality, where, let's be honest, representation really should not have been a problem. However, one particular book left him thinking, and I quote, "This is awful. Why are they making me read this?" As the book was quite invalidating of trans people. He was fortunate enough to have another trans student in his class, so they sat together in the seminar and could talk about how bad it was. Other books used what he called the standard plot twist of the trans person either being the killer or being the one getting killed, explaining that on this module, the sexuality side of things had shown so many different perspectives, and then they'd gone, oh, and here's a bit about a murderer who's trans. Some of the students I interviewed were studying professional health science courses, such as social work and nursing, yet they were not being taught how to work with and support trans people, or being given training that might be useful in their professional careers. One student was also working in healthcare, and he said, it's about people having a vocabulary for it and feeling okay not knowing, and feeling okay to be able to say, I'm not familiar with working with trans people. Can you help me out here? What pronouns do you like to use? How do you like to refer to things? And knowing that one size doesn't fit all, language that one person might feel comfortable with might not be suitable for somebody else, but this just isn't being taught. My hope is that my research will go some way towards improving the university experience for trans students. And as a parent and a researcher, the top three things, I guess, that I would like to see with regards to making safe and affirming spaces in higher education are positive inclusion in the curriculum, improved administration processes that are easily located by students, and training for staff so that they can understand better some of the difficulties these students face. I'll leave you with something that one of the students I interviewed said, and this is their words. University is there to teach humans how to be humans, not just to teach them in one specific subject. So I think there should be, either during the induction week or actually just one tiny, tiny module or something where we learn about proper conduct with other human beings. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Lynn. You know, listening to you when you mentioned, you know, being reflective in the curriculum, it is something that is so pivotal and important to students, that they do see themselves, you know, reflected in the curriculum and in their spaces. You know, we have to remember that for, young people, you know, if it's elementary or through to middle school. Sorry, I'm in North America. I think over seas it's considered primary. But we have to remember that, you know, these young individuals are spending the majority of their time in these spaces. And so by seeing themselves reflected and, you know, visible, it's going to do so much. And so we need to be doing, you know, everything that we can, whether it's through curriculum, whether it's through ensuring that there are gender affirming washrooms, policies, whatever it can be, that these individuals all the way through into post-secondary, they spend a lot of youth spend a lot of time in our educational spaces. And so we need to be ensuring that, you know, from curriculum all the way down is reflective of that. Going to the questions that we have gotten, the first one, Greg, I did notice that you had answered it. But
would you like me to feed them back to you? And I've made a note of all the questions. Would that help?
I think, I mean, you can tell me if I missed one, but I have been watching and I have been monitoring. So if I missed one, yeah, if I've missed one, please toss it to me, but I have been watching and monitoring, but thank you, Lila. So the first one I'll go to, I do see that Greg has answered it in the chat, but I'll open it up to all panelists, is how can we be more trans inclusive in schools which are single sex? So in, I would imagine, you know, an all boys school or an all girls school. So we will start with, let's go to Kate, and then we'll go Kate, Greg, and then Lynn to respond.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, it's a really tricky one, this one, isn't it? Because obviously, by the very nature of single-sex schools, they're going to discriminate against trans students. So, I mean, obviously, there's all the training and everything, and the ideal situation is there wouldn't be single-sex schools, but you know there are, and we've got to deal with that. If the student wanted to be transferred to a school, a single-sex school that represented their true gender identity, then they should be supporting that. But obviously, if they wanted to stay where they were, then again they should be supported, and that should be reflected in the uniform and everything as well. So I think they need. I think uniform policy, I think, is a very important one as well. Having a gender-neutral uniform policy shouldn't mean a sort of a unisex, if you like, policy. I think there should just be a choice of everything. So you know, and anyone can wear anything. They can choose anything from it. So you know, there should be, you know, trousers, skirts, you know, blouses, shirts, you know, everything, and that can just be there. And pupils can wear whatever they want, and they should be supported in that, and nobody should be ridiculed for that. So and obviously things like gender neutral loos and stuff like that, but it is very, very difficult in single sex schools. Real problem.
Yeah, I'll just tie into that. So I saw your question, Rachel, at the very beginning, and I was like writing furiously when I first saw it. So for me, fundamentally, inclusion, it should come from a philosophical consideration about what it means to educate in a school. And when it comes to inclusion in a single-sex school, related to that, I think there should be a fundamental understanding in that school about what it means to enter a student into that community. And that should include things like meeting their needs if they were socially, medically transitioning, for instance, so that they can access the education that they are being provided. That would include things like infrastructure, like uniforms. You know, the best case scenario is that they would have no issues with coming out socially. They'd still have, you know, their peer groups and stuff like that. That would all be fine. So I think those first steps would really be what are needed. I also think it's a conversation that can happen regardless of whether there is a student currently out as being trans in your school. I don't think you should be waiting for a student to identify this as an issue before you start putting measures in place. And I do not see either And I've had not an issue, but like things with this in my own school, where let's say, for instance, if you wanted gender neutral bathrooms, but they were saying that logistically or through funding, it's not possible at the moment. I do not see there being a problem with them committing to that as a goal within a specific time frame, and being very transparent about that being a goal that they are committed to in the first place, again, to create that inclusive environment. So yeah, that's the position that I'd be coming from anyway.
My son actually went to an all-girls school, and it was an all-girls school with a mixed sixth form. And he actually came out as transgender in that summer between fifth form and sixth form. Well, it's not called fifth form anymore, is it? The summer before going into sixth form. So when he did go back into sixth form, he went into school as a boy. School, I must say, were wonderful. They really were good. They absolutely stepped up to the mark and did everything that they could. How it would have happened if he'd come out a year earlier, I'm not sure, because obviously once they were in sixth form, because it was mixed sex sixth form, the uniform was relaxed and they could wear trousers, skirts, whatever they wanted. Up until that point where it was single sex school, the only uniform was skirts. There was no option. So I do wonder how they would have managed that had he come out a year earlier or even a few months earlier. But they did actually manage it very well when he did come out. And as I say, they really did do a good job. And I was really, it made things an awful lot easier for everybody, having that support from the school.
Well, thank you so much to each of our remarkable panelists. This conversation is absolutely incredible. Loving everything that is being put forward. Rolling right into our second question, which especially for our panelists who are in the UK or maybe have been, following what the current climate is going on over there, it should come as no surprise, or even those in the United States. For international, oops, that's not the question. There we go. Do you think organizations like the LGBT Alliance are at the core of creating a hostile environment in the UK to the trans community? Now, for those who are of the international audience, to just give clarification, the LGBT Alliance is a hate group that was given charity status within the UK. It is a hate group that focuses upon removing anything that does not identify with lesbian, gay, bisexual. So essentially, it is very, very much transphobic, two-spirit phobic, gender diverse phobic, non-binary phobic, all of these different things. So, and they've been essentially really sowing the divide as a hate group in the UK. And to be clear, they have factions and chapters worldwide, here in Canada, in the United States. And obviously in the United States, we see an alarming, a historical level of anti-trans legislation coming forward. I believe last checked was over 100 pieces of legislation in the United States that have come forward. So just to give a bit of context as to why this might be on attendees' minds. So the question again was, do you think organizations like the LGBT Alliance, or any hate group for that matter, are at the core of creating a hostile environment in the UK, or we'll go globally, to the trans community? So I'm going to start in reverse order. We're going to start with Lynn, we'll go Greg, and then we'll do Kate. Greg, the reason why I put you in the middle is because I love trying to ensure gender parity. So going, female, male. So, keeping that, in case you're wondering, why am I stuck in the middle? Because you're in this fabulous gender parity sandwich between Kate and Lynn. Anyways, Lynn, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the LGBT Alliance are causing a lot of problems, but I think the core of the problem is the media and the media coverage that is given to people like the LGBT Alliance, and the lack of media coverage given to trans people. The number of news stories that you see about trans people, where there is absolutely no trans representation at all. You know, it's cisgender people talking about trans people, and if anybody is represented at all, it is people like the LGBT Alliance. They get in there, they get their representative there, and there is never anybody from the trans side who can give a counter argument. And at the end of the day, if the media didn't give them the coverage, the LGBT Alliance would be nothing. Over to you.
Sarah's on mute myself. Yes, I would agree completely with that. I think as well, when I think of groups like the LGBT Alliance, I think of them more as symptoms, not causes, which Lynn was kind of saying as well. I think there are definitely questions around why they were given that status in the first place, that was allowed to happen. I think that because it has, there clearly is an attempt to elevate those opinions and stances over others. I think that there are conversations that should be had about, it might sound really boring and academic, but like the structures that we're living in, the reasons why they are trans exclusive rather than inclusive. I would give another example that this just reminds me of, which is that in secondary education, we're not allowed to criticize capitalism at the moment. And to me, they both seem like they're related to each other in that kind of, there's definitely like an ideology being pushed. And I think A, trans identity is being considered an ideology rather than an identity, and B, that it's being seen as something that needs to be quashed rather than being supported.
Yeah, I totally agree, Greg, and also with Lynn. I mean, the LGBT Alliance, I think, have been causing an awful lot of problems. They're very well funded, they're very well organised, and groups such as them, not just them, there are other groups as well, have infiltrated all the major UK political parties. They're in all of them. So all the UK political parties have got a problem with transphobia because they've all just joined them en masse. And so they're trying to change policy from within. So there's a problem there politically. There's a problem there, as Lynn said, but in the media, that the media is giving so much coverage. The media likes a fight. They like to sort of put two people with opposing views together and light the blue touch paper and run away and, you know, watch the fireworks. They like all of that. And the trouble is, it's so damaging. It's, you know, it's damaging to trans people's lives. I mean, it really is. And all the funding they're getting is a lot of it. They're taking out very high profile court cases, and they're trying to change the law and get landmark cases. And we saw that only yesterday, actually. So there's an awful lot that we're being attacked on all sides here, but all of this is completely out of step with the majority of people. I mean, the vast majority of people that I've come across certainly are very supportive. I mean, okay, they often use clumsy language, but that's okay. I can help them with that. I can educate them. That's not a problem. But most people, I find, are very, very supportive, and that was borne out actually by the government survey as well. But you know, we really are up against it at the moment. And then if you obviously look internationally, I mean, obviously you look at what's happening in the States at the moment, you know, with all the laws, the anti-trans laws over there. And also you look at places like Poland and Hungary as well. I mean, there's some shocking things happening there as well. So we are being attacked at the moment, and we need to stand up to them. And thing is, we can't do it by ourselves. We need allies. You know, because we're such a small percentage of the population, we can't do it by ourselves. We need allies' help. This is the time for allies to step up.
Yeah, I would thank you so much to all of our panelists. I would echo pretty much everything that has been said, and obviously with myself being in a very political space, recognizing that, you know, even though it's in the UK, even though it's in Arkansas, even though wherever it is, even though it's not in your own backyard, we need to recognize that the ripples of hate can reverberate beyond, you know, national borders. And so that is why, you know, we all need to be quite, understand what's going on, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in the United States, or if it's in Ghana, if it's in Iran, wherever it is, that we understand what is happening to, whether it's trans, two-spirit, non-binary, gender diverse, all youth that are underneath the rainbow, because it can be quite scary looking out onto the world right now and saying, hey, where do I fit? Where do I, fit in this big puzzle of life? And in some cases, they're seeing that they don't have, their voice is perceived as less than. And so when you have an organization, let's call it what it is. When you have a hate group such as the LGBT Alliance and other ones like it, and its factions and all of that, they further help to bolster that. And so it is through conversations like this, conferences such as this, that we start to change the narrative for those youth. And it is through the actions of our allies. Again, going back to ally is a verb, it requires action. So everyone who's on this call today and is here throughout the entire weekend needs to now follow up with some action, with taking those tangible things that they can, whether it's the questions that Greg has put forward, whether it's some of the learnings that, Lynn and Kate and myself and others have given. I do see that Lila and others have popped back up onto my screen, but I want to take a moment and give a little bit of a plug. I saw Lila put it into the chat, and it is donating. So if you are loving the quality content, such as what you have seen here today, I feel like I'm, at the end of the Sesame Street episode where they say, and today's episode was brought to you by the letter A and the number 1. I feel like I need to count in the background, counting it off. But in all seriousness, this panel and each panel that has come before us and each panel that will follow after us is just such rich content. And everyone has been able to attend here today free of charge, thanks to the remarkable efforts of Lila. So in the chat, Lila will be able to plop the PayPal link if you can. I know these times are tough, but if you can, $1, or in Canada, we call it a loonie, $2, we call it a toonie, any amount that you can, or sharing the content, sharing the learnings going forward. But yes, if you can, donate, support, it'll help the conference. I believe it's happening in the fall and going forward. And my name's Anna Murphy, pronouns she, her, and it has been an absolute true honor and privilege to be able to chair this remarkable group of panelists. And I hope that everyone has an incredible weekend going forward.
Anna, you've done such a fantastic job. And I just want to thank you for joining us from Canada. And I love the fact that the international dimension gives like the two-spirit element, Katie, you were great. Lynn, your experience is invaluable. Somebody wanted to know where you had done your PhD.
Yeah, I'm at the Open University, and I'm just going to use that time to have a shout out to some of my cohort I know who have attended the conference this weekend. So yeah, not too much longer to go now before I've finished.
Thank you. Katie, thank you so very much for sharing your top tips. I saw that people were commenting in the chat that it was really clear definition, and it was really valuable and really accessible. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Lila. Thank you for organising the brilliant conference as well. You put in so much effort. I know how much effort you put in, so well done.
It's a team effort. I wouldn't have been able to do it without you, and you wouldn't have been able to do it without me. So let's give each other a pat on the back. Greg, thank you very much. I wanted to say in response to what helps fostering a safe and affirming space for trans and non-binary people, my experiences in further education in colleges and having a commitment from senior leadership is what has helped me in the past. So having the principal or the vice principal saying, yes, we're going to do it, then everything falls into place. Do you know what I mean? Like I've been in colleges where it was just me fighting, and it was really, really hard. And then I remember one college in South London, I was saying to the principal and the vice principal, this is what we need this, 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 this. And she turned around and was like, yeah, of course. And it happened like literally overnight. We had gender neutral toilets on all the floor. She was a cisgender straight woman, but really, really passionate about education. So I think having that senior commitment, whether it's a headmaster or a school, will really make a huge difference, and then everything else will cascade. I always say not having senior leadership support is like being in a house without a roof. It's okay when it's sunny, but when it rains. And I remember one particular college where I was leading on LGBT plus History Month, and I hadn't asked permission to do it, and the backlash was phenomenal. I learned. So I think if you're looking at leading, then securing senior management buy-in will help. Greg, any other things around what would work and support people to foster?
Well, I just think from what you're saying, I think that's what I'm basically trying to get at. And I know I keep on harping on about it, but I just think it's so fundamental to have a concept about what education means, both to yourself and within the school that you're in. And having that SLT backing you up, like inclusion should be fundamental to anything that's happening in a school. But I think practically speaking, you want to make sure that that's put in writing, or there is some form of accountability to it, so that if anything was to happen, you can be like, well, this is a commitment that we've made. This is what it means to commit to this, and like be able to challenge them on it, you know?
Brilliant. And you were quoting Professor Sue Saunders.
Oh, yeah.
And there she is.
Absolutely. Nice to see you again.
Sue.
Well, it's been truly amazing, and I'm very grateful for Lila, as we've all said, for getting it together. And I want to endorse what she's saying about senior lecturers. But I also wanted to say something else, that when we do training in schools, my passion is always to get every member of the school there. So we get the maintenance workers, we get the catering staff, we get the admin staff, everybody there at the same time. So they get the training, they get to hear the language, and the language is so important. And several people this evening have said, we need to make inclusive language. And we've all got to learn. I mean, there's stuff that we need to build and to work on. But if you have that big event where you have a teacher education, but it's not just the teachers, it's all the staff. A, many of them have never been in that situation before and are so excited. And B, you have then got vocabulary and interest and knowledge shared amongst all the staff, because the bullying, which I call hate crime, can happen not just in the classroom, but in front of maintenance workers and caterers and admin staff. And if they haven't been skilled up, then that work doesn't happen. So it's inclusive. Not only are we thinking about inclusive as far as the subject matter is concerned, but inclusive as far as the staff in the schools are concerned. So that's my passing thrillment of just think it's been an amazing evening. And I know, having looked at the program, it's going to be an incredible weekend. Enormous thanks to everybody, massive thanks to Lila, and we all go off to our much needed dinners and to listen to Trudy, and I look forward to seeing you all on Saturday and Sunday. We've got so much to learn, and on Monday we're all going to be torches. We're going to shine a light. We're going to be torches. So thank you so much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Anna, any final words? I'm just so grateful. You're a very, very skilled moderator. I'll have you again anytime. Thank you.
Well, it honestly has been my absolute pleasure, Lila, and anytime. No, my final words are that, this is the work that we need to do. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. It really, really is. And that marathon is going to be so much easier ran with, the help and support of our allies, of everyone. If we can build a bigger table and invite people to it. And so, yeah, I think that it is so important, the work that is being done on educating. So thank you so much, Lila. And yes, happy to pitch in anytime.